Firstly, as you heard in the news, a district court judge has said it's high time that those who spend their social welfare payments on drink and drugs should receive vouchers instead of cash. The sooner the day comes that vouchers and not money is handed out, the better. And that was Judge Seamus Hughes at Mullingar District Court yesterday. He was referring to the majority. And he said that more than 90% of young offenders who are not working are on social welfare and are committing public order offences. He said they're using their social welfare payments to buy drink and drugs when it's intended to provide for the basic necessities such as food and clothing. He was dealing with the case of a 25-year-old Mullingar man with an alcohol addiction who's amassed 27 convictions, and many of those are for public order offences. We're joined on the line by Brid O Brien now, who's Senior Policy Officer with the Irish National Organisation of the Unemployed. Good morning to you, Brid.
Good morning, Clara.
Brid, it's more so the idea what the judge was saying yesterday, Judge Hughes, that those on social welfare who do commit public order offences, that rather than getting their welfare check, that they get vouchers for the necessities. What would be your response to that, or what's your opinion on that?
I think we're talking about people, say, who have addiction problems. That's not the way to address it. They have very particular problems and they need supports, they need medical interventions to try and address their addictions. Changing the nature of their welfare payment from cash to a voucher will not help them deal with their addiction. They will find some way of trading the voucher and acquiring what they need to feed their addiction. So what they need is a very different type of intervention to help them try and address that issue.
Is it insulting in some way to say that people can't manage money, that, addictions can override the basic necessity of needing food and water?
Addiction affects all walks of life. The difficulty, say, with people maybe for whom social welfare is their only source of income, and for those who are less well off, very often their addictions and consuming their addictions are done so in public places. So therefore they get arrested and they end up in front of the judge. The better off and the wealthy generally indulge their addictions in more private spaces and rarely end up in front of the judge, even though in many cases they probably should. So I think there's very different attitudes to addiction depending on where the person comes from and their source of income. So I think what's important is that we put supports in place to help people address addiction, which can be extremely difficult, as we saw over the last week with the tragic death of Amy Winehouse. Unfortunately, addiction is something that can really consume a person's life and it can be very hard to address, but really, kind of undermining their social welfare payment is not going to help them address that at all.
Let's just take what somebody listening to this might be thinking. A lot of the people that they meet out on over the weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, even Sunday evenings and night, they're in the pub or they're, partaking in some antisocial behaviour with cans in some public area. Where do they get the money for this, particularly young offenders, if the social welfare has already been reduced for that category? How can they afford to go out drinking so many nights of the week? And not all of these people have addictions, and therefore maybe a voucher system would be better for young people who are going claiming social welfare.
For starters, you can't presume that everybody who you see out drinking publicly is a social welfare recipient. The judge is referring to those who come before him. And it's very possible that a lot of the young people who maybe are arrested for being out and about, who are not social welfare recipients, never see the inside of the courtroom. So I think we just need to be careful. Very particular categories of people get arrested in this country, and the rest of us don't. So I think we need to be very careful the generalisations we make from those who appear in the courts, particularly when it comes to addressing with particular issues in a harsh manner. So none of us can presume that those we see out with cans and partying are necessarily social welfare recipients. I think young people, and treating them differently and treating them in many cases disrespectfully and paying them in a way that is radically different to how they would secure their income when they get a job is not wise. Social welfare system must pay people in as close a way as possible to how you would be paid if you got a job. And what the social welfare system needs to be doing is supporting people to be able to get a job. Now, when people have addictions, then other services clearly need to be involved, because the social welfare system cannot address the issue of addiction. That needs medical services and drug supports and that to help people address those issues. And so it's a combination of supports is what is required when somebody needs that type of support and an intervention.
I hear what you're saying, but I just want to quote something that Judge Seamus Hughes said yesterday. He said, the majority, more than 90% of young offenders who are not working are on social welfare and are committing public order offences. He seems very definite in what he's saying. More than 90%. Yes, Clara,
but my point is that who ends up in front of him? Young people who might be found committing public offences, who maybe are either in work or maybe come from better off families, are not ending up in front of him.
How come?
So generally what happens in this country, it's like our prisons. Our prisons are populated by people who come from very particular communities, and in the Dublin area come from very particular addresses, and others don't. So I think we need to bear that in mind. Who ends up in court tend to be from poorer backgrounds. So I think if it's addiction, and if the young man who's in front of him did appear to have very particular problems, that needs to be addressed, and changing the nature of his social welfare payment is not going to help him address that. He needs support to address, to deal with his addiction, and then he needs supports to be able to get the right skills and the right support to be able to find work, and that's what he needs.
I don't know necessarily if it's correct, Brid, that most of the young people who are now on social welfare are from poor backgrounds.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, Clara, who ends up in the court. The vast majority of young people on social welfare do not end up in the court. The judge is talking about people he sees. And generally, if you talk to people who are involved in kind of studying crime and how crime is dealt with in this country, invariably those who end up in the courts come from less well-off backgrounds. And those who are involved in crime or wrongdoing in this country come from better-off backgrounds, tend not to end up in the courts. So the judge is talking about those he sees in front of him, but they're coming from very particular backgrounds. And that's just what we need to bear in mind. We cannot generalise out from those who end up in the courts, because as a society we seem to definitely send certain groups to court, and we don't send others at all. Just look, for example, at how we're dealing with the wrongdoing that went on in the banks. None of those people have ended up in court at all yet.
Do you remember? I remember when I was younger and I used to work in little mini markets and places like that, and there was the butter vouchers. Do you remember those, Brid?
I don't know.
Did he not? I don't know when it was, but there was butter vouchers. But I do remember that people would be swapping their butter vouchers for cigarettes and for other grocery bills as well.
Yeah, I think if people have, people have, if people have an entitlement to their social welfare payments, they have their entitlement, and that really should not be undermined. If people have particular issues that need to be addressed, they need supports to address those, and I think then for people need, a lot of people will need support around education, training, will need support around securing work, and that's what the social welfare and the new entity Solace needs to do. And then I think for others then who do have addiction problems, that needs other supports, and that needs to be addressed or put in parallel before the other supports can be put in place. But I don't think swapping their payments for vouchers will address that problem, or indeed address the issue that the judge clearly would like to see addressed.
Would it affect make a national state?
I think it could have a very negative impact. I think a lot of unemployed people feel there's a stigma attached to unemployed anyway, and that introducing measures of this nature will only add to that stigma, and it will not address the issues he was raising in court yesterday at all.
Okay, so you think basically the main focus now should be on education training, whether it be through Solace or whatever, and then putting in safeguards for people who have addictions to get them through those addictions and get them back into society so that they can become part of society, earn, get jobs, get educations, pay taxes, therefore that the country can, get back up on its feet again.
I think we need a range of supports for people. Some people just need advice and guidance. Others need very intense supports. And, you know, in terms of education training, and then others, there are very particular issues that need to be addressed, like addiction issues. And I think we need, you know, the services working together to be able to help people to overcome those particular problems and to try and give them a, you know, a better start.
OK, Brid, thank you very much for taking our call this morning.
Thanks very much, Clara.
Thanks. That's Brid O Brien there. She's Senior Policy Officer with the Irish National Organisation of the Unemployed. We were just talking in relation to a district court judge yesterday who has said it's high time that those who spend their social welfare payments on drink and drugs should receive vouchers instead of cash. I'd like to know what you think on that. You can text me on 083 30 10 103, or you can call Sinead on 0818 300 103.